and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 146. And the title of this episode is What Does Taper, Market Glitches, Cyber Attacks, False Flags, and War Spell? Well, it spells economic collapse. And before I get started, just want to welcome all those new people who signed up for YouTube as a subscriber. Those people have been signing up for alerts. Just to let you know what the site is, if you come to the x22report.com site, I have tabs up top. One is called the Economic Collapse. That is the timeline of what has been going on, and I keep track of that. It is dynamic. There's also another tab up there called Sentinel Alerts. If you just click on that, that will bring you into another page that just goes through current news that is happening throughout the day, and I comment on that going throughout the day. If you haven't noticed, I put up the new logo for X22 site. It's a circle with an X and two 2s and two pictures on it, and I designed that myself. I didn't pay anyone to do it. I did it on my own, and that is the new logo that I put up on the site. And for those who didn't know, I did an interview with Greg Manarino, and if you didn't listen on Friday or Saturday, it is on the website, and I will be uploading it to YouTube. So those YouTube people who haven't come to the site, I will be uploading it this evening. Let's get into the economic collapse news. Now, we know there's war going on. We know things that are happening, well, soon to be war going on, and we know there's a lot else going on. And one of the biggest things we get is that the U.S. durable goods post the largest drop in nearly a year. And this report goes on to say that orders for long-lasting U.S. manufactured goods recorded their biggest drop in nearly a year in July. And what is going on here? This report goes on to say, excluding transportation, demand for long-lasting manufactured goods was weak almost across the board. There was a decline in orders for computers, electronic products, electrical equipment, appliances, and components, and orders for machinery and primary metals were flat, and even for orders for defense capital goods plummeted by 21.7%. And this is not something that we're seeing as an economy that's doing well. I mean, this is a sign that the economy is not doing well. And, we have to take and put everything together. If we look at real estate and we look at mortgage applications that are plunging, the traffic to the new home builder sites is decreasing, sales in the gardening and home furnishings is declining, and the new sales of new homes is starting to decline, and we see most of the purchases are in cash and for rental units, and those are being bought up by investment companies and not people. And I've done a couple of reports ago where I think it came out of Reuters, where it said, because mortgage rates are rising, mortgage applications are decreasing, we're coming out of the summer months, we're going into the winter now, and real estate normally falls even further in the winter, and we are not going to see real estate rebound at this time. And we know for a fact that real estate is declining because President Obama was out there campaigning and letting everyone know how great real estate was. But, even if we look at retail for this holiday season coming up, there was an article in Reuters that says that the big stores are not looking very hopeful for a good holiday retail season. And this goes on to say that Macy's, Kohl's, Walmart, Target, and even the luxury chains, Saks, Nordstrom's, they all posted second quarter disappointing sales, and they are not hopeful about this holiday. They believe that its sales are going to be very low. And the reason why they're giving why the sales are going to be low is because people are spending more money on their cars and homes, and they're cutting back on items like clothing and shoes. I don't know. I don't think people are spending more money on homes and cars. I think people are unemployed, underemployed, and they're just having a hard enough time getting the ends to meet there and to buy food. I mean, I think people are having a tough time buying food, having people having enough money to clothe their children with the basics and themselves, to pay for electric in their home, even to pay for rent or their mortgage. And I don't see why, I don't understand why most of these stores don't understand what's really going on. Well, I guess I can understand, but it seems like there's a disconnect of what is going on and what the mainstream media and the government is telling people, and there's confusion in the middle. And when the government is out there telling you that unemployment is 7.4% and it's dropping, telling you that housing market is doing fantastically, and we're just on the cusp of a complete turnaround in the economy and everything's getting better, and then we see the opposite in mortgage applications, we see the opposite in sales of homes, we see the opposite in retail, where the major chains are showing disappointing sales. We're seeing, this was back in February with US Today, stating that many of the stores will be closing down stores, Best Buy, Radio Shack, JCPenney. JCPenney's hurting quite a bit. Sears hurting quite a bit. GameStop, and all these stores, laying off people, closing hundreds and hundreds of stores. This is not an indication that the economy is doing better. And now we see durable goods taking a huge, huge hit. And we're seeing this all over. Forget about the stock market. I mean, that's being pumped up by the banks, where the Fed is giving the banks money, and the banks are putting it back into the equity market to create this huge, huge bubble. We saw this same pattern back in the Great Depression. We saw it again in 1997, 2000, 2008, and it's the same thing that's happening now. Every single market hit its all-time highs, and then came crashing down. And we're seeing the same thing happen right now. Now, there's a lot going on in the Middle East with Syria, and I saw a report today that Russia is building a new sixth-generation fighter jet, and just like the drones that the U.S. are using, they are controlled by drone operators, and they are drones. This sixth-generation fighter jet will be pilotless, and it looks like they're starting to work on this right now. Italy is also warning against military action in Syria. They're telling everyone to think about this 1,000 times over, and we should not rush into war, which I completely agree. We should not rush into any type of war. And there was another report that a large arms shipment reached the Syrian rebels. Gulf-based supporters have sent a 400-ton shipment of arms to Syrian outgun rebels, one of the biggest to reach them in their 2-year-old uprising. And just think about it. The U.S. government has been paying these mercenaries now for 2 years, billions of dollars. But we have to remember that there's a sequester. But the money flowing into these paid mercenaries, no problem. Not a big deal. Most of the ammunition that's reaching these rebels are shoulder-fired weapons and anti-aircraft machine guns, and they are still waiting for the big stuff to arrive, which have not reached them at this point. And we also have to remember that the fiscal year ends September 30th. This is the budget where it allows the Obama administration to supply the paid mercenaries with weapons, and when September 30th hits, they have to go back to Congress and make their case again. And this is why they're ramping this up so quickly right now, because they need to get this war started before that date, and other reasons. And along the lines of the sarin gas, there were reports that it might not have been sarin gas. It could be chlorine gas. It could be a mixture of sarin and chlorine. So there are many just different reports floating around there right now. But out of the Ben Swan site, he says what the national media isn't telling you is that in May, Turkish security forces found a cylinder with sarin gas when they searched the homes of the Syrian militants from the al-Qaeda-linked al-Nusra Front. And the question is, where did this gas come from? Well, we all know where that came from. But the bigger thing is, we know the rebels have been using the sarin gas. The UN inspectors went in the first time. They said, no, it wasn't the Assad government. It was the rebels. The United States made a big stink. They stamped their feet. They wanted the UN to go back in there. The UN went back in there, and they said, oh, yeah, it could have been both sides, maybe. Yeah, something like that. But we know that this was a complete setup and a false flag to get the war started back in June 30th, and I have it on the site. There was an article and a report that said that this plan was approved and to use chemical weapons and blame it on Assad government. Now the U.S. is saying that it is too late for the UN Security Council to go in and take a look and inspect the area. They're saying that it was 48 hours, or it's too much time that passed, all the evidence is no good anymore. But we have to remember that Syria and Russia invited the UN Security Council in to inspect the area for chemical weapons. And it just so happened when they arrived, chemical weapons were used, and the US, Israel, France, and UK were out there screaming that it was Assad who used them. But again, that story really doesn't make sense, because if you're paying attention, Syria and Russia invited them in the first place to inspect and show that they weren't using chemical weapons. And why would they use chemical weapons on their own people? They would really, if they were going to use them, they would use them on the rebels. But why would they use them on the rebels? They were actually winning the battles and pushing the rebels out. And today, to make it even harder for the UN Security Council to inspect the area, there was sniper fire, which kind of pushed the U.S. Security Council off of the area that they were inspecting for quite a while. But now I believe they are back and they are inspecting the area, and the UN Security Council was very pissed off that people would actually fire on them. And they told both sides, they don't care who it was, to stop shooting at us. Now, perfect timing, Israel intercepted chatter. And from this chatter, they know that Assad's brother used the chemical weapons on their own people. And wow, what perfect timing. This is amazing. And it's an anonymous source who came out with this. They know division. They know the division of the military. They know exactly who it was. Now, let me ask you a question. If they intercepted this chatter, why didn't they intercept all the other chatter of what Assad was doing and how he was going to maneuver the military to push the rebels back? Wouldn't they be feeding the rebels all this information? And again, what military uses an open system to talk about what they're going to do? It makes no sense. It would be encrypted between the armed forces, and unless they had the key and the method of the encryption, they would not be able to get this information. And this really goes back to the chatter that the U.S. got from the al-Qaeda terrorists who were, chatting in a chat room about terrorist threats in the Middle East. I mean, is anyone really believing this? This is how people are going to actually communicate, who are planning or who have a military? It makes no sense whatsoever. And what's happening now is the U.S. is pushing for the UN to abort the inspection, and they don't want them to go in and inspect the area. And this message in this report, it says the American message to Mr. Ban as of Sunday was that the U.S. believed there wasn't adequate security for the UN inspectors to visit the affected areas to conduct their mission. A senior official in Mr. Obama's administration said the administration also told the UN that the U.S. didn't think the inspectors would be able to collect viable evidence due to the passage of time and damage from subsequent shelling, this person said. And they're trying their hardest to keep the UN inspectors from inspecting the site, because what's going to happen is they're going to figure it out finally that it was not the Syrian government who did this on their own people. They're going to find out, like they did the last time, that it was the rebels who actually did it. Now, we know there is a buildup of military assets around the area. Right now we have the Harry S. Truman and the Nimitz, which are aircraft carriers in the vicinity. We have the Kearsarge, which is the amphibious warship. Now there are some ships that are underway. The Mahan in the Middle East is a destroyer, and it's heading towards its destination there, and those are carrying the cruise missiles. There's also the G.H.W. Bush, the George Washington, and these are aircraft carriers, and they are underway in the Atlantic, and their destinations are unknown. And there are other amphibious warships, the Wasp, the Bonhomme, and again, we don't know where they are heading at this point, but everything is in motion, things are happening. There's also reports that warplanes and military transporters have begun arriving at Britain's Akrotiri Air Base on Cyprus, less than 100 miles from Syrian coast, in a sign of increasing military strike against Assad regime. And we know John Kerry is out there, and he's talking about, going to war. And this is, they have complete evidence. They know exactly that it was Assad. And, we really have to think about this for a second. How do they really know it was Assad? They have no inspection. Nobody was in there. They don't let the UN Security Council in there to inspect the area, but they know for sure that it was them, just like they knew the last time, and it turned out to be the rebels. So, realistically, they have no clue. This is a complete false flag to get this war started. Okay, let's move on here. Now, credit agencies, they use your FICO scores to, that lets them know what your credit rating is. And I hate to say it, but a lot of people today, the credit ratings are not doing, they're not that great anymore because of all the foreclosures, from people losing their jobs or being underemployed, can't make their payments on their credit cards. We're seeing a lot of defaults. So what they're going to do, instead of going by FICO scores and all this, they are going to now use Facebook friends and who you are associated with that will determine if you are a good credit risk. And this goes on to say that some financial lending companies have found that social connections can be a good indicator of a person's credit worthiness. And the way this is going to work is, let's say you are friends with someone who pays their credit cards or a loan and they pay it late. Well, this is a good indication, since you are friends with this person who pays their credit cards or loans in a late fashion. That would mean that you would also pay your credit card and loans in a late type of fashion. Because, they can tell by the people that you hang out with on social networks from your friends and how they are, it must be how you are. So everyone needs to be careful of who you're hanging out with right now. So you might want to ask your friends, listen, do you pay your credit cards or your loans? Do you make late payments? Do you pay them on time? Because if you do, I can't be friends with you anymore. This is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard of, and they're just making everyone's life a little bit more difficult. Now, there was an article that said Pentagon prepping for large-scale economic breakdown. And this says that Pentagon and agencies like the Department of Defense are in full-scale emergency readiness in their for a cataclysmic events that are believed to ultimately ignite riots in the face of chaos and economic collapse. And there is a document that has been published, and this goes on to say one of the largest examples of this is the U.S. Army Strategic Studies Institute paper that talks about the threat of domestic crisis that are expected to lead to a massive unrest throughout the nation, spurring more paranoia into the notion that every citizen is a terrorist. The report starts talking about everything from the economic collapse to a loss of functional political order brought upon by a hostile group within the United States that could access weapons. And this goes on to say, in such a scenario, the Department of Defense would then be forced by circumstances to come in and stop domestic resistance or insurgency by working with local law enforcement. And we can see that this is a buildup because we know that there is a DHS person out there who has a website that's talking about race riots. They try to do this with the Trayvon case about race riots, and they tried to get this off the ground and it didn't work. And we know that an economic collapse is coming, and we know that DHS was created for terrorists, but it's really not for external terrorists, it's for internal terrorists, because if you go to the DHS terrorist alert system, there's never anything on there because the terrorists that they're looking at are within the U.S. And this is why they're building up military. This is why the IRS is being trained in with assault rifles. This is why the TSA are being armed, and Social Security also is being armed. And we're seeing this throughout, and we see military drills going on. We saw them in Houston, Miami, LA, all over the country. We're seeing in major cities, and we're seeing these draconian laws being put into place, like New York with the stop and frisk and ask questions later, so they can stop and frisk you first. We're seeing Detroit looking to do this. We see tell on your neighbor if you think that person has an illegal weapon. And we see all these type of things happening, and what this tells us is that the government is getting ready for what is coming. And way back when I first started, I talked about a false flag event, which will get us into war because they need to start a war to cover up the economic collapse. And we see this playing out right now. We see there was a false flag event with chemical weapons. And again, if the U.S. cannot push this war forward with this latest chemical weapon, we know that the troops, the U.S. government has paid mercenaries, and the U.S. Military has trained them, and they are now in Syria because they took off on August 17th and 19th, and they marched into Syria. We know that the U.S. military has CENTCOM, which is an underground base that is equipped with 270 officers. We know there are aircraft carriers, destroyers, all headed towards the Middle East. We know that the U.S. put out a terrorist alert for travel advisory from August 1st to August 30th, and there was a terrorist alert to get everything prepped up for this war. They've been trying to get into Syria and Iran for, years. They've been telling us that Iran is going to have a nuclear weapon, and they're 3 to 5 years out, and this has been going on for over 25 years. And in my other reports, I went over each time that they explain this. And we're seeing this completely build up. Now, they're also saying that they do not need the UN approval to do this strike in Syria, and President Obama has also come out and said that U.S. ground troops will not be going into Syria. Well, of course they won't, because they've trained paid mercenaries, and they'll be going in. But if they cannot get this pushed forward, because we have to remember right now 60% of the American people do not want to go to war. Congress does not want to go to war at this time. They might take it to the next step. The next step is creating some type of false flag event here in the U.S. And we see that they're already trying to use this propaganda of something happening here in the U.S. The chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee on Sunday warned that dangerous chemicals recently used against the Syrian people could be captured by al-Qaeda and used on Americans unless the president acts quickly and does something. And this chairman says, my greatest fear as chairman of Homeland Security is these weapons ending up in the wrong hands and being shipped over to the United States and being used in the U.S. So they're already starting the propaganda of doing this. Okay, now, we know that we've had many things happen in the world of cyber attacks, and Amazon, Google, Instagram, Airbnb, all these sites for some reason have gone down from 5 minutes to an hour. Very strange, because most, and I would say almost all, of these sites have redundant systems. It's just not one server running the systems. It's multiple servers spread out across the country, and most of them are load balancing systems, and they play off of each other, and if one goes down, the traffic is rerouted to the other system. So for the systems to actually go down seems a little impossible, but this has been happening. But what also have we been seeing? And is this a coincidence? You tell me. The Eurex, okay, also had a technical glitch and trading was halted. The Israeli flash crash, the TASE system, also had some type of typing error or some type of glitch. And then we have the NASDAQ, which also had this computer glitch that they're claiming, and brought down the system for like 3 hours or so, and they had a halt trading there. So we're seeing many different anomalies happening in the internet world, and there was an article out of Germany that's saying that these NASDAQ crash triggered by Islamist hackers. And we also saw it come out of USA Today blaming that this looks just like a denial of service attack by the Syrian Electronic Army. And it looks like they're trying to build a case about what is happening here. And we know this fall something is going to happen, because we do have to remember September 5th and 6th is the G20 meeting, and there's rumblings about the U.S. dollar not being the reserve currency, that they might talk about China becoming the reserve currency. We also know that the FBI put out a private sector advisory about this threat of a cyber attack on the financial institutions. We also know that there is a power grid drill this fall. Michael Pinto has been warning about a crash this fall. They're talking about tapering. We have Lagarde coming out saying, you know, we don't have to taper, we could still print. and the central bank of central banks saying we have to taper, and they're going back and forth. There was a plan of how the tapering is going to work, starting in September and completely finishing by 2014. We also understand that China, Japan, and other foreign nations are starting to sell off their treasury bonds. So there are a lot of things happening. The economy is not doing as well as the government officials are telling us. And let's just go back a little bit in the past. 2008, Bernanke, government officials told us that there is no recession being forecasted, and they told us this in 2008, and we had the recession in 2008. They also told us subprime is contained, and which it wasn't, because the whole thing just crashed. Back in the Great Depression, the president came out and said that the crisis is behind us, and he made this whole speech in 1930 how America is rebounding and they're pushing forward, and in 1932 there was this major, major crash in the Great Depression. So we see this over and over, that the officials like to tell us one thing while in the background other things are happening. Just like we're seeing in Syria, where they're telling us that the Syrian government is using chemical weapons, and we find out later that this was a plan all along for the rebels to use the chemical weapons and then blame it on the Syrian government. So we know something is happening. There's a lot of strange things happening at this point, and we know that 9/11 is coming up. We also have the Million Muslim March with the 2 million biker ride to D.C. to counteract the Muslim March. So we're seeing a lot of things happen all at once that are coming up this fall. And again, I do believe there will be some other events that will occur. We also have to remember that John Kerry said that they are going to have the UN Arms Treaty passed during the month of August. We're coming close to the end of August. We have the UN Arms Treaty, the gun bill, and CISPA all pending in the Senate still. So they are waiting for their events. And if you look on the economic collapse timeline, I've had those events up there since I started, because for them to get this completed, they need to have all of this passed. Listen, everyone, thank you very much for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.